Good morning. This is Sandro Fermo, and the title of this work is Sandro Fermo lightening up about September 11th. It starts off like this. Globalization has been one of the most hotly contested phenomena of the past 2 decades. It has been a primary attraction of books, articles, and heated debate, just as postmodernism was the most fashionable debated topic of the 80s. A wide and diverse range of social theorists have argued that today's world is organized by accelerating globalization, which is strengthening the dominance of world capitalistic economic system, supplementing the primacy of the nation-state by transnational corporations and organizations, and eroding local cultures and traditions through a global culture. That's exactly what's happening in this small town. And this is what I wrote about it back then. This was 28th of April 2007. The associated misgivings of relishing vindictive nothingness is gracefully abandoning itself towards a better idea of a lonely mental health that is invigorated by what fame pulsated, a glorious seduction of indelible sly malfunction, that bruised the loner with a realistic premature idea of the hereafter, that was true blue, and as the loner was awaiting something better to do, he then lost himself within a cordial stealth and a theatrical portrayal of whom should have really been put in jail. But not a psychotic innocent, but apparently an anemic establishment that disenchants its true calling with a man who was constantly describing the inner perturbation that for both the Canadian elite and American mafia, unfortunately, was a welcome experiment to protect those who really caused the society's lament. For the man in the iron mask underwent, nonetheless, a decent task in order to analyze and to correlate why some do hate and yet love a sacred Canadian dove. With an Italian Islam in mind, he cast away his rhyme, while somehow be doing time with simple relatives that somehow this investigation forgives, with the torture of aristocratic secrecy that is both disgusting and is upon some tracking device's frequency. Sexuality was often used to condone his apparent virginal depression. It was not a hex, but a Catholic liaison. That for some this proved his weakness, but for the true wise, it permitted him to adore his reserved greatness. Had he disappeared during those frantic years, there might have been no problem except for the directly involved consciences to try to forgive themselves and absolve them to their cowardly wretchedness. So this unfortunate fellow had to prove that he was always mellow until he was invigorated, not by his personal shame, but by finally knowing who was truly to blame. So forcibly he had to join. For play, he had to join the CIA or was it the FBI, Mrs. M, knowing for sure that he was such an intelligent fella who was justly and simply ill due to a genetic malfunction in this ridiculous military drill. That was also analyzed by this creative master of justice and truth, acting upon the superstar's attention with an unbridled incapability and schizophrenic tension. For most Mrs. C's marriage rides upon a worthy English carriage, and the 4 English roses are not nor ever going to become notorious, for we are bound by restraint and honor, and that's not a Nazi symbolic trait. Knowing damn well that we will never ever have a happy trigger finger, for this is not a simpleton's dark night, for we are often haunted by someone else's plight, but the pacifistic rage induced by a worthy wage, which is meek and discreet, will let these men of gallantry, of true superiority, perform the so-called measly feats with the over-underestimated understanding of what we should be finding, an accomplishment of duty and intellectual awakenings that are bonded by both our faith and Christian shortcomings. Somehow grace must be measured with what her so-called superiors treasured: a hefty bank account, a dainty daughter, and an Munich slaughter, with the faintness of heart of a once merry lark over our true inner abodes, pretending to adhere to assimilative codes. For mom and dad speak Italian, and the cheap Italiese rhetoric is not their proper tongue's function. Is he identified with the Muslims? If I must adhere to Italy, it is because they have set me free. It has set me free, while my mother ponders idiotic perceptions of a nation that brutalized our immigrant sons with a certain kinship towards atheistic nuns. In my creativity lies a burdened language that does not necessarily mean that I'm paying English homage, but it's just a scholastic enjoyment of our open-minded adherement. That's when language is cool, towards the true mosaic essence before forcibly succumbing towards a terrorist hindrance, a little dog going down in the background, analyzing our tortured internal schizophrenic domain while really riding high upon a European plane. That is the sound and incorporation of situation, gently soothing linguistic expression that is truly our seniorial perception, enlightened lanterns towards both the smell and breath of our parents' care and caress, while adoring all that God is storing, a wholesale enlightenment of rekindled establishments, in order to negate and no longer propagate hate with the denial of whom history has put on trial. This is to me nor soothing nor pleasurable, but it sure as hell beats being deniably fashionable, acknowledging that beauty lies within. Beauty lies within, and its expression is not a sin, but a normal perpetuation of hopefully divine creations that are innocently trotting upon a consumeristic world where only the so-called banners of modernity are unfurled. Forgetting that both form and matter are why we upon this mechanized rule are all getting fatter. In order to truly comprehend a certain lesson without going on a weekend warrior's drunken bend, we must no longer create an elusive hereafter, but must somehow consent manufacture with the code of imaginary abodes induced by your intelligence to infatuate her momentary derailments with law and order that does not truly forgive unpleasurable or unrealistic rancor, but reminds us of our formidable capability to distinguish reality from its own realistic frailty, while being judged upon the state of truth and justice, knowing lest before any God or democratic country we are all just a bunch of silly novices. Okay, so we're going to close it off with this song here. There we go. And we'll whisper here. What is a dollar going to do if it cannot be spent with you? What is commercialism worth if we're not together withdrawing what is anguishedly dawning? A simple task in order to perform just a simple why and ask. Why have we cast a spell from a premature hell? And then only do we permeate through it like some ungodly silhouette that places upon a surely high horse an enticing bet that ravages already rancid souls upon our nicely trimmed lawns, like some all-encompassing daunting infatuation, with some cordial, really peculiar nation that is truly bonded by the grit of some unholy matriarchal tit that points both at you and me, setting our repressed libido free with the sexual notoriety, and like a celibate skin magazine that is cordially obscene and misdemeaning things find true female stature, fulfilling a sort of rekindled rapture with a voyeuristic voyage like some weird cabbage that is similar to the brain's internal storage, growing ever so deceptively on our backyards and nice gardens, with its own true physical grandeur forgotten. For Mr. Solid Brain, seemingly or future does disdain with vegetative premonition, some cool vibe and non-polluting ignition. That is the hope of serving a dire hangman's rope with the infinite biochemical seduction of booze's primary function, in order to obligate our primary historic savage state, unlike laying a sacrificial son upon Abraham's plate that was not wiped clean, but was somehow keen upon those Christian symbolisms of a strange dude's wisdom, in order to produce a fatherly reliability with a courteous mortality that was a nuisance in its nature. But perhaps this did God a favor, a sacrificial stone and a measly love and a crazy love. Our commandments often disown with a lawful ambiguity of some guy's realistic invisibility. Disclosures of globalization initially were polarized into pro or non-celebrations or attacks. For critics, it provides a cover concept of global capitalism and imperialism, and is accordingly condemned as another form of imposition, the logic of capital and the market on ever more regions of the world and spheres of life. For defenders, it is the continuation of modernization and a force of progress, increased wealth, freedom, democracy, and happiness. It champions present globalization as beneficial, generating fresh economic opportunities. Its detractors see globalization as harmful, bringing about increased domination and control by wealthier, overdeveloped nations over the poor, underdeveloped countries, thus increasing the hegemony of the haves over the have-nots. In addition, supplementing the negative view here background is discussed in the background. Globalization critics assert that globalization produces an undermining of democracy, a cultural homogenization, and increased destruction of natural species and the environment. They'll always hate us. The 1% is not the rich. The 1% are those who figured it all out. Remember, you gotta get in to get out. And I'm in and out at the same time See you later, guys. I got in and